Call to order the Village of Riverside Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting and public hearing for Monday, December 16th, 2019. Director App, will you call the roll?
Chairperson Mateo.
I am here.
Commissioner May.
Here.
Commissioner Hannigan.
Here.
Commissioner Marhol.
Here.
Commissioner Pelletier.
Here.
Absent are Commissioner Miller and Commissioner Matthews. We do have a quorum.
Okay. We have the minutes from the November 25th, 2019 Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting. Any changes to it? I have a couple edits, and then
Okay.
we'll ask for a motion. At the very bottom of page 2, the last line, approved by the communities or were already built. I think that's right. Then on page 3, it's just a typo, third full paragraph, fifth line, meetings to discuss. Missing an S. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Looking for our trustee liaison, and there he is. Trustee Pollock, have you any news from the village board? No. Okay. Moving on, I'll call to order public hearing PZ 19-06, a public hearing to consider an application to expand an existing special use to allow a classroom addition to an existing elementary school in the R1A single-family zoning district. The petitioner is the Riverside School District D96. Let the record show that all commissioners are still present, but Commissioner Marhul is going to recuse himself. Did you want to?
Do I recuse I guess the question for council is, do I recuse myself at the public hearing time or the discussion time?
The entire thing, and, yeah, if you don't mind just having
No,
a seat
that's,
outside.
I remember
All right, very
our
good.
training session.
All in favor to open the meeting?
And did we state the reason?
Oh, the reason that Commissioner Marhul is recusing is because he sits on the D96 school board. So thank you for that. Okay. So a public notice was published in the Landmark on November 27th and will be entered into the record as an exhibit. So if anybody plans on speaking during this public hearing, we'll swear you in. So if you plan on saying anything tonight for this particular public hearing, would you stand up and raise your right hand and be sworn in? Anything, questions, comments, testimony?
For the
For the
Just
school.
for the school board.
For the
Yep.
school, sorry.
Yeah, we have 2 public hearings tonight. This one is concerning the school addition. So raise your right hand.
Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge? Thank you.
Thank you. Director App, can you give us a summary, please?
Yes. Blythe Park School is located in our R1A zoning district where schools, including elementary schools, are considered a special use. So they have an existing special use for their existing school. However, they are looking to build a classroom addition onto the school, which constitutes an increase in the intensity of the zoning. So they are before you for an expansion of their existing special use permit. The classroom is going to be approximately 800 square feet. It's located at the southwest corner of the building, and this increase in building coverage will not be putting them over any of the bulk restrictions regarding building coverage or impervious surfaces, so that all remains the same. Additionally, the addition is not any taller than the existing building for its maximum height. The existing building's peak height is just under 26 feet at its highest point, and this addition, I believe, is only going to be about 13 and a half feet tall. So it does not exceed the maximum height restrictions in our bulk regulations. This will also include a new secured entry on the east side of the main entrance. those calculations were included in the bulk calculations as well, so it's not putting it over any of the bulk restrictions. Additionally, this is considered a local historic landmark, therefore it was reviewed by the Preservation Commission. They did approve the certificate of appropriateness for the addition at their November 14th meeting. I did provide you with a copy of the draft minutes for your consideration from their discussion. So we have representatives from D96 as well as their architect here to answer any questions that you have and kind of go over the project as a whole for you if you wish.
Thank you. Petitioners, if anybody would like to come to the podium and describe your project.
Sure, I'll go ahead and get started. I'm Martha Ryan Toy. I'm the superintendent for the Riverside School District 96. So thank you for this opportunity to share this information with all of you tonight. I'm actually going to be turning this over quickly to DLA and to WT Engineering to share more. But just wanted to kind of give you a very brief introduction that we have been engaged in a long-range facility plan really in earnest since spring of 2017. Looking to address issues related to increased enrollment, which has been kind of about a 10-year phenomenon in Riverside, in these past 10 years. We know that we need more space just for the enrollment. We also, in schools, have a lot of space needs for what we call small group learning or itinerant. So those of you that know schools also have psychologists and speech pathologists and social workers and reading specialists and math specialists, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just about classrooms. Also, school security is a very significant issue, and there are really standards of best practice, and we believe that securing the front entrance in a different way at Blythe Park School is an opportunity that we want to be able to implement. We also, our plan is to create, to really turn Blythe into what we call a two-section school. So that means 2 of every grade level, 2 kindergartens, 2 first grades, 2 second grades, on through 5th. We actually think that probably Blythe was intended to be a two-section school, and with enrollment waves and variations and how we use a flexible boundary policy in District 96, it was, in most recent years, it's been a one-section school, but enrollment would indicate that as we can move more children over to Blythe Park School, there's something very nice about actually having more children in the school and having it be a two-section school. It also helps us alleviate overcrowding, in particular at Central School, which is where Central's, again, in the sort of center of town, is where most of our kids end up going when we're stuck on space. But Central is also a very crowded school. So this is really an alleviate overcrowding goal, make sure that we have adequate educational spaces for all children, and improve school security. So with that, I'll turn it over to the 2 of you. So thanks to Ryan.
Thank you. I'm Ryan Kelly. I'm with DLA Architects. Just kind of a quick overview of the project. As was mentioned, this is on the Historic Landmark Registry. So we work closely with the Preservation Commission in keeping sympathetic to the existing architecture. Again, we're not exceeding the existing height of the volume that this addition is adjacent to. So that was important. Also, the views through the building became very important. And then also distinguishing it as something, not replicating the existing architecture, but something unto itself. So not the same as the existing building. We chose a material that is really sympathetic to Blythe Park. The existing structure is brick, but on the interior it has a lot of wood paneling. So that's something that we chose to take to the outside of the building in order to keep the materiality consistent. I think that's kind of a general overview, and I'll turn the site issues over to Jason.
For the record, Jason Green, WT Group, civil engineer for the project, 2675 Prattam Avenue, Hoffman Estates.
The zoning map. The site is located here at Leasley, Blythe, and Kent Roads. And I guess we can include Easter Grove as well on the west side. So that's the bounding. The zoning is R1. It's the R1 District A as opposed to AA. And it's surrounded by the same zoning district to the northeast, south, and to the west is the R1 District AA. This is just an aerial map
that shows the neighborhood around the school. Here's the park, and here's the streets. You can see predominantly residential surrounding the property. I should have mentioned, north is up on all these exhibits. Here's the existing school. This is the property line. You can see it's kind of a triangle property. The park is to the west. And here are the building additions, the secure entry, the small building addition at the east side with a sidewalk connecting up to it. And then this is the school classroom addition at the southwest corner, 800 square feet. And that is going on top of an existing asphalt area. So there's no change in the runoff or the imperviousness of that. Part of the secure entry and walk are going into grass areas, so there's a slight increase in impervious just because of that. It's 0.03 acres total, including the 800 square feet, so it's virtually no effect from the stormwater. We've procured determination from the sanitary district who monitor stormwater for Cook County, MWRD, and they've deemed that no stormwater effects are required because of the size of the project. We've also reached out to the village engineer, the consultant, Christopher Burke. They've performed a preliminary review, and they concede that the improvements don't warrant anything unusual or above and beyond normal practices. That is, we're not proposing any utility improvements. Everything will drain the same way that it drains now, just sheet drainage. The grades won't be modified significantly around the building addition. They'll just match the grades that are there and will remain unchanged.
And it looks like from your elevations that your downspouts all daylight, so you're running everything on the surface, nothing is going down below grade.
Correct. So the downspouts used to connect underground all through the south and the east facades of the school, and those were disconnected several years ago. So where the pipes go into the ground, the downspouts were removed from that and put onto splash blocks, and we're proposing to continue splashing to grade so that we're not increasing the amount of runoff going into the storm sewer system.
Okay.
Other questions for the petitioners? So there's no net loss of parking?
So there are two spots that are there, but there's space just to the west of it that's not used for parking right now. So, well, it can actually gain a spot, or it can be a net wash for the amount of parking.
And what kind of wood is this you're using?
So it's a phenolic panel, which is, if you're familiar,
Like a trespa type system?
it's similar to a trespa. It's different in that it's got a timber face veneer encapsulated within the HBO panel. So each panel is unique, which is important to the Preservation Commission in that it looks like wood, but it wears a lot better. So that's, and we will install it in a sort of a shiplap orientation, more of a traditional installation than what you would see with a trespa.
I see, okay. So is this functioning as an actual wall, or is it a rain screen?
It is technically a rain screen system,
I see.
so, yeah.
Okay.
Flashier.
More questions? Was there anybody else who, after the fact, had questions or comments regarding this project?
think you did a nice job. Usually with a addition to a historic property, you go one of two ways. You try and make it look like it blends in, or you go with something that contrasts it. And I think this was probably a nice way to go here. Yeah, I like it.
So there's a recommendation that if the special use is approved by the village board, that the school would comply with the new law about adequate radio coverage. Is that something that the school is willing to do?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, do we have a motion to close the public hearing? Second?
Aye.
All in favor? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, would somebody like to make a motion to make a recommendation?
I'd like to recommend to approve.
Okay. Second. All right, discussion? Mhm. Or go right to the standards. Okay, they're on page 3 of our memo. So the first standard, the proposed use is designated by the zoning ordinance as a special use in the district in which the use is to be located. So by code, that is met. The proposed use will comply with all applicable regulations in the district in which the use is to be located. Agree with that, including the condition?
Yes.
The location and size of the proposed use, the nature and intensity of the operation involved in or conducted in connection with it, the size of the site in relation to it, and the location of the site with respect to streets given access to it are such that it will be in harmony with the appropriate and orderly development of the district in which it is located. Director, you still haven't received any comments from neighbors, right?
No, I've received no comments from neighbors.
You think that standard's been met?
I think so.
The location, nature, and height of buildings, walls, and fences, and the nature and extent of the landscaping on the site are such that the use will not unreasonably hinder or discourage the appropriate development and use of adjacent land or buildings. Agreed?
Agreed.
The area is pretty well developed. Parking areas will be of adequate size for the particular use, properly located and suitably screened from adjoining uses, and the entrance and exit drives will be laid out so as to prevent traffic hazards and nuisances. There's no change to parking or entrances. The proposed use will not cause substantial injury to the value of other property in the neighborhood.
Agreed.
It's a small addition.
Yes.
The last one is not applicable. No, there was no prior application to the board, so we don't have that time constraint. Okay. Did we get a second on the motion?
We did, Teresa, second.
Okay. Any more discussion? Call the roll, please.
I guess I would just ask for clarification if the motion is with the condition regarding complying with Title VI, Chapter 7 for the radio amplification in certain buildings. The motion.
Confirmed, yes.
Thank you. Shall I call the roll?
Please.
Commissioner May?
Aye, approved.
Commissioner Hennigan? Aye. Commissioner Pelletier? Aye. Chairperson Mattea?
Yes.
Motion passes.
So this is a recommendation that will go to the village board second meeting, perhaps in January?
Yes. So that'd be the,
Well, they will make the final
16th?
determination. Thank you.
Thank you.
So before we open the next public hearing regarding gravel driveways, is there anybody who has not filled out a witness slip who might be wanting to comment during the public hearing? They are on that table there, if you wouldn't mind filling it out. So now I'll call to order PZ 1908, a public hearing to consider text amendments to Section 1073E driveways to revise and/or clarify permitted driveway materials and regulations related to gravel driveways, and Section 1010-7, non-conforming residential driveways to revise and/or clarify conformance timelines relative to existing residential gravel driveways. The petitioner is the Village of Riverside. All 5 commissioners are present. All in favor of opening the hearing? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. A public notice was published in the Landmark on November 27th. It will be entered into the record as an exhibit. If you would like to speak during this public hearing, please stand and raise your right hand and be sworn in.
You'll have to do the swearing in.
Right. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes. I do.
Thank you. Director Abt, can you start us?
During the public hearing for the variations for 124 and 128 Berry Point, the Planning and Zoning Commission noted that the 2005 code provisions regarding gravel driveways were ambiguous, confusing, and unclear. As part of the Commission's recommendation on the variation petition, the Commission members recommended to the Village Board that the intent of the zoning code provisions relative to gravel driveways be clarified and the code made explicit relative to the ability to maintain gravel driveways going forward. At the Village Board's meeting in October, the trustees tabled that Berry Point driveway variation and requested staff prepare a text amendment relative to gravel driveways for the Planning and Zoning Commission to review and conduct a public hearing. They requested that it be clarified that gravel driveways need to be replaced and that the text amendment should specify a date that they must be corrected by. Staff has worked with the village attorney to prepare a text amendment that removes the standards for maintaining existing gravel driveways and explicitly states that gravel driveways are non-conforming driveways. It also clearly states that the only exception is decorative pea gravel driveways for homes that are designated historic landmarks approved by the village board. The proposed amendment includes non-conforming residential driveway section. This has been revised to state that residential gravel driveways, other than those authorized, and it states the subsection which references the decorative pea gravel only for homes that are designated historic landmarks, must be replaced with a permitted driveway material by January 31st, 2023. Staff is proposing this 3-year period to replace gravel driveways. Although the cost to replace a driveway is not minimal, it is not exorbitant either. An asphalt driveway can run from as little as $5,000 to $15,000 depending on the size of the driveway, whereas a concrete driveway is more expensive, where those can run anywhere between $9,000 to over $25,000, again, depending on the size of the driveway. Pavers would be the most expensive option, although some are similar in cost to concrete driveways. Staff believes that 3 years with notification is adequate time to budget for and arrange for the driveway replacement. You have a copy of the redlined text amendment before you that outlines the changes in the actual language in the code. According to the provisions of the zoning ordinance, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation and village board decision on any zoning amendment is a matter of legislative discretion that is not controlled by any one standard. However, in making your recommendation and decision, you should consider the following standards for text amendments, and those standards are outlined in your staff report that you can go over this evening. I've received a number of phone calls and people have stopped into the office. We did set a notification to all of the gravel driveway owners that the village was aware of, so they were notified of this hearing. Several of them are here this evening, I'm sure, and have some input and questions. But I believe we received one, and you received a copy of it, letter from one gentleman that was not able to make it tonight regarding the gravel. Oh, I didn't see you there, sorry about that. For the meeting, but he is here, so he'd be able to speak as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and that's all.
Could I have a clarification of what a witness is? Because I'd like to speak, but I don't know that I'm witnessing anything.
If you want to say anything during the meeting, then you would be a witness to the public hearing.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Did you stand and raise?
Yes, I did.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Do any commissioners have questions for Director Abt before we open the floor? Anybody would like to go to the podium and speak? Yeah, please. Just state your name first, if you would, please.
Good evening, my name is Mary Slesher, and I live on Berry Point Road at 128, and my neighbor is at 124, and we have abutting driveways, gravel driveways. We did petition to keep those driveways, and it sounded to us like the board was saying yes, but then they tabled it to change the text. That seems a little unfair to me, to change the text in the middle of the game, but I'll wait and see what happens tonight. I heard there was is it a 5-year?
3-year.
3-year, okay. So we'll see, but the gravel driveways are, they're appropriate for the age of the houses, particularly mine and my neighbors. They're 1915. I'm thinking we're the village in the forest, and to be putting black asphalt just seems crazy to me. You don't find asphalt in the forest. So that's what I have to say about it for now. It's also an expense. We might have to put gutters on our house and downspouts and things that we don't have now. So it is an expense. It's more than just the driveway itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Good evening. My name is Tom Holacek. I've been a Riverside resident since the 1980s. And I'm here this evening with this question of gravel driveways to, in turn, ask a question. Like to be appropriate, like to be a conformist. Prior to our moving in the 1980s, the first owner of the home had a thin layer of gravel that supposedly he used as a accessory or adjunct driveway. We have a main driveway, and then next to the garage, there's this small area that's a thin layer of gravel. Since that time, it hasn't been used as a driveway. It's dormant or not being used as a driveway, but there's still some residual gravel there. I don't intend to use it as a driveway. What are my options with this in the offing, I guess, would be my question.
Director App, are you familiar with Mr. Holacek's driveway?
So this is along the side of the existing driveway. It's a gravel kind of strip.
Actually, it's not even alongside of the existing driveway. The driveway meets the garage appropriately, but then adjacent
That's
and north of the actual garage, there's I'd say maybe it's 6 feet wide by maybe 15 feet long. That was the original dimensions, and because it's not being used, there's just some gravel there. So my concern is the village going to be punitive because there's this residual gravel sitting there and not being used as a driveway, not being used really for anything?
Well, I think the ultimate goal is for the gravel driveways or parking pads to be removed. So I think
Okay.
the village's goal would be for that to be removed.
Okay.
We wouldn't necessarily want it to be paved if it's not being used as a parking area. And so then it could just be turned into a garden bed or, kind of reseeded so that it can be part of the lawn.
So
And that would be acceptable.
gravel be gone, grass replace, that would be
Acceptable.
in conformance?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this is my wife, Sylvia. She's asking if we have a visitor. There's sort of a part 2 to this question, and that's those of you who know Des Plaines Avenue now, as you approach 26th going north, it's gotten very, very busy, very busy. In fact, there was a fatal accident right down the street about a week or 2 ago. So, there is no longer any parking in front of our home. I think we're one of the few homes in Riverside where you can't park in front of your home. So the question is, when we have a once-a-year gathering, am I not able to use that area for once a year, or would that usher me into non-conformance, or how does the?
Technically, parking is required to happen on a hard surface, so technically
Okay.
you're not supposed to be having guests park on your lawn or in your backyard.
Okay. And those of us who can't park in front are kind of out of luck then. Because I'm guessing there's less than a dozen homeowners in Riverside that are subject to this. A little bit unfair. But it's the way it is, I know with traffic now. The traffic is such that during, late afternoon, during the week, if anybody parks there, if any of you know what I'm talking about, it's gonna be disruptive to traffic, and especially to police vehicles or emergency vehicles trying to find their way through, so. I would just say that, we're a little bit short on this because we have no options, whereas most of the other people in the town do have a place to park. I would ask that that be considered. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm John Plunkett. I live at 107 Pine. Mary and I live in a house that was built in 1894, and we've been there for more than a quarter of a century. Neighbors on both sides and across the street have also been there for over a quarter of a century. So we have a pretty stable little niche in Riverside. I came here this evening to just kind of put a human face on code, because code ultimately does have ramifications on people. Mary and I are both retired. I've been out of the workforce for 6 years, she for 2. We have to be careful about our expenditures, so the garage we've been working on trying to get a permit for and build in a flood zone, or actually we're pushing it out of a flood zone, is more than interesting and more than expensive. Civil engineers don't come cheaply. We plan to get that done in April, hopefully. So that's an issue. We're trying to pace our capital improvements over time so we don't have to draw down prematurely on 401ks. The $5,000 jump in property taxes that we got this past year also makes things a little interesting if you're on a fixed income. And then, of course, more interesting is when we discover we have a very deep 220-foot lot, and the garage, of course, is toward the back. So whatever average costs are going to go into this, go to the high end of that average, and that's what we're going to spend. For years, I would prefer to see a code requiring the ripping up of all pavement, all paved driveways, and replacement with grasscrete or permeable material, so that for the sake of the environment. And concrete is quite expensive, so as beautiful as it looks, we really don't want to go with that. On the other hand, petroleum products like asphalt give off a lot of byproducts that damage the environment. So as an environmentalist, we're kind of in a bind. We can't afford some of the other alternatives, which of course are much more expensive than even concrete. you know, in coming here, I guess I'm hoping that the commission will seriously take a look at this and the ramifications on individuals' lives. I understand there's 29 people in this community. I don't know how many the total is, but my guess is there'd be huge pushback if my code was proposed to remove all concrete driveways for the sake of the environment and for the sake of flooding. Riverside's got some flood problems. I think that any proposed changes, were this to go through, for the sake of people, especially I would say on fixed incomes, I would think a period of 5 years to at least pay some of these costs out would be deeply appreciated. And, you know, we've been delaying storm windows because we really have to replace our almost 80-year-old garage. And so being able to push this out another couple of years would be appreciated. But what I would really prefer would be just that the village actually gets serious about inspecting and insisting on maintenance of gravel driveways. You know, so if there are certain standards set, I wouldn't be opposed to an inspector, since there are only 29 of us, once every few years coming by to make sure we're meeting standards. To me, that would be far preferable and probably better for the environment than some of the alternatives we're going to be engaging in. In any event, I encourage you to approach this really as if people mattered.
Thank you, Mr. Plunkett.
I'd like to follow him since he stole my thunder.
Thank you.
Is our voice. I'm Mary Plunkett, and I live at the same address. And again, restating what John had said, I believe a lot of us in this room probably have been here for more than a quarter of a century. And we came after raising our kids in Chicago, but we've been here 27 years. We came here with the idea that we were going to stay until we were carried out feet first. As one of my friends would say, we're in it. And we love our village. I don't mean to offend, but I think we're a little bit disappointed by this because it has come so quickly. And we do support the village. We are active in village things, activities. We support everything. We raised children, grandchildren, paid our taxes. And we were grandfathered in a while back, but now I feel like we're being pushed out. You know, and I would agree totally with John in that let's have gravel driveways and have them inspected. When we started pricing out, there are many of the alternatives that I think are wonderful. But honestly, I'm not going to be replacing boilers, and I'm not going to be replacing other things that we need to have to really live in our house. I'm curious because I know that historic landmarks, and as stated in the code, have decorative, probably because they're historic, they're considered decorative pea gravel. Our house is over 120 years old. It's not a historic landmark, but I believe that at the time that our house was built, they certainly didn't have anything. They had horses and carriages and maybe a few buggies, but they didn't have this sort of thing. So again, I'd like some consideration for that. Having to replace the gravel, as John said, we started looking into it, and I really would not like to go with asphalt because the hydrocarbon output is horrible, the petroleum products that are used in it. And again, that's something that should be, I don't want to really get all the people with asphalt driveways up, and I don't want to do anything to cause any more problems for anybody else, but it's probably it's an unexpected burden that would be exceeding easily for many of us $10,000. And as I said, we have windows, furnaces, and everything else, expenses to save for. And I think because of this, and because of it coming up so unexpectedly when we had been grandfathered in, people are going to start wondering, well, what's next? what's going to be the next thing that doesn't seem like it's an immediate problem that we are going to have to bear the cost of. With high expenses and a deadline attached to it, it becomes somewhat onerous, I think. And it just is a bit of a curiosity as why this came so quickly at this time. This is the holiday season. It's a little bit of a merry cheer, but we certainly do want to be in compliance, and we want to stay in the village, and I think many of you do as well. And so in saying that, we'd like to find something that would be workable for everybody. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Plunkett.
Hello, my name is Paul McNerland, and I live at 79 Groveland. You might know, like right down by the river there. Just waiting for the levee to break. Anyway, this is about gravel driveways. And I would like to mention that I am not a longtime Riversider. We are pretty new, second year, and we knew that we would have to upgrade our driveway when we signed the mortgage thingy. And so we knew what was coming down the pike. However, once we got into the thick of it, we realized there were some extenuating circumstances with how our lot is laid out. Seems that it's a bit crooked to the lot line next to us. So at the very front end near the street, we're like 18 inches over. In the back, we're well in compliance, but it goes in a bit of an angle. And I was kind of looking at how things are worded here with, what was it? On a driveway is located on a side lot line, point B. And I was, not that I was keen to drop a wad of money on paving, and I'm totally fine with the aesthetics of gravel as they, you know, suit the house and the location perfectly, and drainage issues to boot. But I was ready to do whatever I had to. But then I was told that I would have to, and Ms. Apt, I think we talked briefly, and I was wanting to pave what I have to be in compliance. But you mentioned that if I reconstructed it, it would be considered new construction, and I'd have to put it back inside that 18-inch, like right on the line, and then a foot inside of that, which would make my existing driveway about as wide as a Model T. And I drive a Mini Cooper, so it's not like I have a big 4x4. It's still pretty narrow. But right as it stands, the gravel driveway goes up to the next property, which is a paved walkway already. And I know my neighbor, he's totally fine with it. And actually, he was surprised when I did try to bring in conformance according to the business development book. It said it had the existing driveway, gravel driveway portion in there. And so thinking that was what I had to do to comply if I didn't want to reconstruct from scratch. So I just want to know if I do bring it into, like, if I do pave with pavers or concrete or whatever, if I'll be allowed to keep it at its current dimensions. It says here, it shall be considered a legal non-conforming use, but I just want to make sure that if I reconstruct it with new materials, that I won't be forced to set it back basically 24, 28 inches inboard.
Technically, you would need to, with the new driveway, meet the 1-foot setback requirement. So that would mean, in your instance, if it's going over the property line, you'd have to bring it back to the property line and then additional foot to meet the
But then it
required
makes this
setback.
weird little trapezoidal or triangle strip of grass that goes back for like 40 feet. I mean, yeah, that was the shrug I got when I talked to you the first time. And I'm sorry, I'm really trying to abide by the rules here. I just want a little bit of help in conforming to the rules. I mean, to do something that looks and doesn't make a lot of sense. The apron is already poured and formed. It's right there. Why would you then have the apron and then move the driveway like 24 inches. It doesn't make sense.
Right. The option that you would have in that case would be to go through the variance process, similar to what Ms. Schlescher and her neighbor are doing to get a variance in order to be able to maintain it as gravel. You could go through the variance in order to be able to keep your driveway in its existing
but-
location and
okay.
then pave it.
That was never brought up. I would have been fine, but I was given a shrug and like, oh, well, you got to move it back. I'm like, that's, really difficult to stomach when you're basically throwing out like 25 grand. It's a 130-foot driveway. It's like, it's not a small chunk of change. I already put down 5 grand just to bring it into compliance with what I thought was the standard. And now I got to, lay out on top of that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to cry poor, but, we just moved in. There's a ton of stuff to do in this house. And we're trying to be good residents. We love this community. I've known about Riverside my entire life, and I consider it a privilege to live here amongst all of you. So I want to do the right thing. So I just need the help and guidance of the council.
Right. So that would, if indeed the code goes through and makes that clarification, any new driveway you would do would either have to meet that 1-foot setback requirement, or you would have to get a variance in order to pour your new driveway in the same location as the existing.
Okay, what does the variance entail?
It requires a public hearing similar to what we're having here. There's an application that you need to fill out. You're supposed to meet specific standards that are outlined in our zoning ordinance for variations. So they're looking for what the practical difficulty or kind of the unique situation or hardship there is in your instance that is causing a hardship if applying the code is causing that hardship for you. It is a $500 application fee. It covers the publication and mailing costs for going through the variance process. It's not refundable. Ultimately, it is a public hearing like this is, and then it goes to the village board for them to ultimately make the decision whether those standards have been met. And if they do approve it, then you would be able to build your driveway per what your request was.
And who makes the decision? Is it a joint or is it a single person?
It's the entire board votes.
Okay.
Yeah. So they would make, this commission, I should say, would make a recommendation to the village board after the public hearing. So similar to this, they'll make a recommendation to the village board regarding the text amendment. For a variation, they do the same thing. After they hear testimony, they consider the standards and make a recommendation to the village board. The village board receives those findings from the Planning and Zoning Commission, as well as an ordinance that adopts the variation for their consideration, and they discuss it and they make a vote.
Okay. So I have 3 years to comply. Is there any chance of getting an extension? Would that be part of the variance to like come into compliance? Because I just sacked out 5 grand for dumping a boatload of gravel in there to level it out and everything. And just that itself is a token of hopefully good faith that I want to bring it into compliance. So if I could get an extension, just
well, I think the time frame
prorating.
is here up for discussion, and ultimately it'll be the village board that decides on that time frame. I don't know if the variance process would be the best option for extension, but I would maybe defer to the village attorney on how that would play out.
Yeah, I mean, if the board ultimately approves language that says you have 3 years or you have 5 years, and you get to that point and you, for whatever reason, have a hardship and you're not able to comply, you could ask for a variation from that. But as Sonia said, tonight, we have 3 years as the proposal, but we've heard several people say they think 5 is more appropriate. I'm sure the commission will consider that and the village board as well. But 3 years was the proposed starting point.
Right.
And just as some general background, people were talking about, this coming out of the blue, et cetera. It's our understanding, this first came up because Ms. Schlesser and her neighbor asked for a variation recently. And in looking at the existing code requirements, it was back in the mid-2000s?
2004, 2005.
2005 that the board first made gravel a prohibited material for driveways, right? And a few years later, they sent letters out to all the existing gravel driveway owners saying, you have until 2010 to come into compliance and get an approved material for your driveway. And that was the grace period that was built into the 2005. So that's our understanding of what happened.
Never got that letter.
No.
Okay.
I never got it, and I've been here 40 years.
Okay, so we understand. So when 2010 came and went, nobody was giving, the letter ended up saying, if you haven't complied by 2010, we're gonna issue citations. But the village didn't go and issue citations, and 9 years later, what they've been doing is when people transfer their properties, they tell them as part of that, the new owner has to come into compliance, as was done in your case. And they're given some time to do that. But when this question came up about the variation, we're looking at the code provisions and discussing the lack of clarity and the fact that the previous board in 2005 had said, you have 5 years to get rid of your driveways and make them complying. The idea was, well, we're going to kind of restart that clock and give everybody some new time period to do this and remind them with notices during that time period and stuff. And so that's kind of what we're doing now is restarting this, but it's not a new thing for gravel to be prohibited. And it was our understanding, based on what village records that staff was able to find, that these notices had gone out at some point in the past. In fact, we have one that had a certified mailing signature card for it, back from, I don't know what year this was.
Can I say one thing about on the podium? You're all making decisions about people's private property. They probably made 30-year mortgage payments. I wrote the letter, and they've said a lot of the stuff I was going to say. But, it's a matter of opinion. The bottom line is somebody doesn't like the look of gravel driveways, and people here like it. And it's our property.
And some are being allowed, and some are not,
We need people who are speaking to be at the microphone, please.
Sorry, I probably said more than my piece, so thank you and appreciate the answer. That's excellent information. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Georgia Albertson. I live at 379 Shenstone Road. We bought our house 52 years ago with the gravel driveway. If this is going to force us, frankly, to sell our house. We're just not going to do this. I'm 76, my husband's 79. Maybe this is the message, move on. Either way, if we sell it, it's going to cost us because whoever buys this house now has to, put in a different kind of driveway, so I'm losing money that way. That's not really my main issue. It's the water problem. If everybody, 39 houses, put up more blacktop or concrete, where is this water gonna go? If this happens in my house, not only perhaps will my basement start flooding, the neighbors immediately to the west of us are gonna have all that water that the gravel driveway is now absorbing. And I'm sure this is very effective for everybody here. This is a real water issue. We don't have rain anymore. We have torrential rain. The backyards in my area used to flood a little bit. Now it's a lake. Come swimming anytime you want. It's gonna only get worse from this, and this is not even being looked at. Economically, this is a nightmare for me, but it's also gonna be a nightmare for everybody around us. And any building that has a gravel driveway now is absorbing that water. Not gonna happen anymore. So I think this needs to be a real issue. And we all know flooding in certain areas is a problem here. Gonna increase flooded basements, the whole 9 yards. Excuse me. I find it interesting, the Blythe Park, when they were presenting their program, what's one of the things that he said? Because they had an existing blacktop where they're going to put this new building, so it won't affect flooding in that area. It's an issue that they brought up. It's an issue that's going to affect you're going to hear from a whole lot of people that all of a sudden now we have it. And since when does Riverside conform? That's the beauty of this town. You can't go on any block and see any two houses that are like same colors, anything. why is this necessary? I think it's just somebody doesn't like the way it looks. We don't all have to be the same. That's why we live here. So that's what I gotta say.
Thank you, Ms. Albertson.
Hi, my name is Rita Labia, and I moved here in 1979. I'm one of 10 kids. We're from the south side of Chicago. We moved to Berwyn when I was 16. I used to work at Burger King. I'd see the people in Riverside and think, someday I'm going to live there. So when I was 25, I worked as a nurse for about 4 years, bought my own house at 169 East Quincy as a single female, which everyone told me I was nuts. That was in 1979. My problem is today, I can tell you that the village has really never, ever helped me out. I'm fully vested as an RN. We all lost our pensions because I worked for Catholic hospitals. 1994, I got PTSD. Right now, I am living on $20,000, and I have a home. If somebody in the village, and this is a very wealthy village, and they spend money unnecessarily, I feel, but I go along with it, if they'd ever want to use me as a tax write-off, they actually can, because I'm making under $25,000 a year. And as long as you live in Crook County, not Cook, and you know somebody that is in need, and you match my $22,000 I get a year before Social Security takes out, they can use me as a tax write-off. Now, my driveway is a gravel driveway. My garage is grandfathered in. My home is 97 years old. And so it's on the property line. So if I have to change my gravel drive, which is longer because it goes 3 feet further deep into my lot, I could not do that in 5 years. I could not do that in 3 years. I will have to move. I would love somebody to show me how to live on $20,000 and do better than I've been doing. I don't have an answer for that. People can say, well, then sell your house and move. I know I paid at least $350 when I paid it off. I paid it off 5 years early. And when I got my interest rate, it was 18%, which was cheap in '79. So if I could get $200,000 from my house, I'd run. I'd leave here. Because I mainly worked, when I worked as a nurse, we took everybody in that needed help, and probably that's why we lost our pensions. Now, there's people much worse off. I'm glad I'm healthy. I'm glad I'm still one of 6 kids, because 4 are gone, and I love the village. I try to save water as much as I can. I know I'm getting a little off, but I want to explain myself. I use 13 units of water a year, yet I am still charged for 30 because they went to the 1 to 5, you pay this. So I'm trying to save in every way I can. My house is not the nicest, but I'm content with it. I try to do the best I can. And I think if possibly you could extend it to 5 years, there might be a way I can try to save money. Had I known in '74 when I started nursing we were going to lose our pensions, I would have maybe saved more. But I can bring anybody in my income for the last 20 years and show you. And I don't have a savings account. I have a checking. I just got my first cell phone last year at 66. And it's fine. It didn't bother me not to have one because we didn't have computers when I worked as an RN. We did everything manually. So all I'm saying is I would just like a fair shot at doing what's right and what's best for the village because I've been here 40 years and I still love it. I mean, if I didn't, I wouldn't be here. And I have to say, my neighbors are great. They never complain about anything, my gravel drive or anything. So that's about, I know I went in a little bit different directions. I do have PTSD and I have panic attacks every now and then, but I just want you to know that I'll try to do whatever I can, whatever is decided here. Again, I do feel though, with gravel driveways, if you can kind of keep them nice and neat, and maybe somebody can come and look, or if you want to have a special color, my house is virgin blue. I painted it silver frost, it came out virgin blue, and I love it. If I could get a pea gravel or something to match that or whatever, that would be fine. But just, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have never done this in my life. Never spoke in front of a group. I've taught in nursing, I've taught, but I've never done this. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I didn't anticipate saying anything because I wasn't really sure. I got the flyer in the mail the other day. Can I get sworn in? Can I sign the form now? I apologize.
Please.
I've never attended before.
Please stand up, raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'll fill out the form as soon as I'm done.
Great. Okay.
My name's Alex Talenka. We first moved into Riverside in 1976. So I've been here for a little bit like many of you. Obviously, I haven't been a homeowner that whole time. I finally bought a home, 300 Fairbank, 2009. 2017, we bought the home that I've run past my entire life, 420 Fairbank, the yellow house, and I love it. I really do. And the one thing that I learned when we bought the home was it says Division 1, Lot 1. And I didn't know that when I bought it. The owners, because it's never been out of the family other than us, you know, many people are familiar with it, even they don't know when it was really built. Some say 1889, some say 1891, regardless. So I worked for the water department through college. The first question that I have is, what detriment does a gravel driveway do to the village of Riverside?
Well, I believe back in 2005, the argument was that it is a maintenance issue and a dust issue, so the main push was to have a dustless driveway material. Based on some of the background information that I found that was the push towards it, is something that was an easier maintenance and something that was a dustless surface. So that was the impetus when this originally came up in 2005.
Okay, but so we're a few years since then. What's the detriment of a gravel driveway today?
I would say, again, it tends to be a maintenance issue in
So
many
that if it's
instances.
maintained properly, does that diminish that concern? Because the reason I wanted to say something is for that reason, number one, the detriment is people don't like it. I don't like to put a blacktop driveway on that property would destroy it to me. If I'm not mistaken, there's likely 2 gravel pieces going to the back because that's where the carriages were going with the horses. That's the integrity of that home. According to the owners of the building, and who knows what truth this is, one of the horses is still built under the garage, or buried under the garage. And people, and I wish I was making this up, but I'm not. How does changing that, if there's an appropriate gravel that can be used, or how do I go through the process? And I heard, for this gentleman that if he wanted some kind of a variation from, how do I go through that process? This is, again, if it's Division 1, and I remember when I was a kid, ooh, Division 1, everyone's like, ooh, the Division 1 people. Ooh. So apparently now I'm Division 1, number 1. Lot 1, and I apologize, because everybody that knows me would radically step up and say, you're not even close to number 100. But that's all I'm asking. I mean, to talk about the truly the nature of what that property is as a whole. It is what Riverside started at. And because people tell me what gravel needs to be purchased, it would be my question to you. That I have to believe that there's some dust. If the dust was the concern, what's the dustless solution to this? Because I've never looked into it. I mean, obviously, when we were going through the process, at 300 Fairbank, when I replaced that driveway, I had an exposed aggregate because I wanted it to, the integrity of what that property is to me was important. So that's what I did. An exposed aggregate driveway on that home would be exorbitant. You know, we had to do a little bit of work to that property when we bought it. Teresa's been inside of it. We had to do a little bit of work, and I apologize if I'm not allowed to use first names. I'm not trying to be inappropriate. I have 5-year-old twins that are going to St. Mary's. Expense is something that's a concern other than just, this is the concern. So thank you, and I do appreciate you letting me, ask that I speak, but I didn't know what to anticipate. And I knew that there was no way that I couldn't speak, just given the comments that I've heard of these people, that if somebody doesn't like dust, and because of that, we're gonna be forced to do something that alters what our property looks like. There needs to be some other type of a solution, or how do I find a way to get myself, onto the landmark status, and then I can get a pea gravel. When I first bought the home, I'm like, how's the first home when Riverside was decided to become this is the first home that was built. How is it not on that registry? So thank you. I apologize.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please, sir.
Can I make a suggestion about what the gentleman just said?
Sure, please.
Again, I'm Tom Holacek. We own summer property, and this exact situation has come up out there with dirt roads, and it's not identical, but it's very similar. The way that the subdivision decided to take care of the dust issue emanating from dirt and gravel roads, actually they used slag. I'm not an expert on stone, but their board decided to use a slag component and then treat it, and I'm going to say a bad word here, chemical. They used a chemical to treat it to minimize the dust from cars going over the gravel. So if I can just ask the commission to give that some consideration, or maybe I'm speaking about something that's not germane to the discussion, but I believe it works quite well out there. So maybe, if possible, if the commission could look into that as an option, everybody could keep their gravel and have it treated, hopefully with non-harmful chemicals of some kind to keep the dust component down.
Thank you.
Can I just say one thing?
Please.
Rita Layback again. When the village decided to put in new gas lines in the 100 block, on the whole 4 blocks of East Quincy Street, they used the center house, which happens to be my house. So the sidewalk is right in line with the gravel drive. So for me to have to replace it, they'd have to do a lot of digging because of the way they put the sidewalk on top. That's just, what I wanted to add, and I don't know how that would work. I don't know how far down they can go, because with my house, you can see the base. You can still see the foundation, so the gravel's up a little bit. But I noticed that when they put they started from my house because they said it's the center, and they ran the pipes towards Harlem, and they ran them west. And then when they were done, the sidewalk just butts right up to the gravel. You couldn't even put like another inch of gravel down if you wanted to, because it's gonna run off into the sidewalk now. So I guess there'd have to be digging done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mike Thomasek, 56 Pine, lived there 31 years. Let's see, thanks for doing all your work as planning commission people. And I just want to put on the record that my wife and I, Sharon Thomasek, opposed the proposed changes to the already existing ordinances governing gravel driveways in Riverside. The current code is sufficient and there are no good reasons to change it. The proposed changes remove a grandfather provision subject to certain maintenance standards that the 2005 board put in. The 2005 board put these provisions in for a reason. They recognized that the owners who bought properties with gravel driveways were already in compliance with the ordinances, and so it would be unfair to these property owners to summarily mandate the paving of the driveways. The new proposed changes unduly single certain owners out for significant financial outlays and financial hardship that others in the village would not be subject to. The estimated $10,000 to $15,000 cost would be an excessive assessment to these owners. Further, the changes are not for essential or safety purposes. In fact, the gravel driveways work well already for water absorption and general water runoff. In fact, I took a look at a standard contract from Ms. Robert Andreas and Sons, found it in the Riverside Exchange. It's an asphalt concrete vendor. And I noticed that on the number 7, he's got about 16 qualifications to a bid. Robert Andreas' Sons cannot and expressly does not guarantee that water seepage to an existing structure will not occur once concrete is poured, nor is Robert Andreas, Inc. responsible if water seepage occurs. So 31 years, no water at all, and something's working right with this absorbing gravel medium that we have. And it's a little bit disconcerting when I heard that. The proposed changes are very costly. Over 50% of our liquid wealth we have to pay for something that's not even necessary. Would you be comfortable putting almost everything you have replacing something that's already working, especially when you have a host of other home-related expenditures already in the queue? And I will reiterate what I heard somebody say, that Riverside is a village in the forest. So some number of gravel driveways are actually aesthetically pleasing. Our house is an 1882 Victorian, and when you step on the driveway, it's like stepping back in time, as our friend here just said. In fact, my house is pictured like this big in the train station. But it's really not for my house. It's for Larry the lamplighter with his horse and his lighting. But behind it is our house. And so it's kind of like a Twilight Zone Willoughby, you know. I step in, it's like a Proustian moment, and it's 1869. That's the aesthetics part. But more than that, curiously, just like we know that Olmsted is like the original ecologist, we're all going back to his ideas of water absorptions. And I talked to Ms. Hampton. She said, the best medium for driveways would be the water-absorbing materials like grasscrete or permeable pavers. And so we already have that level, that kind of function with this. And so it's kind of absurd to roll back that to do and use hydrocarbon-intensive, smelly blacktop. And another comment, and again, all due respect to my blacktop neighbors, I've been kind of driveway sensitive, driving around town looking, and they don't laugh. I mean, they look really bad. Mine is like 32 years, and it's fine. It looks great, but I've seen what happens with blacktop. It kind of looks like a Martian landscape. I guess you have to do maintenance or something, but the cracking, the Chicago winters and summers don't do that well. That's just a function point of view too. So let's see if there's anything else I could say without getting. too upset. Yeah, the other thing is, I mean, you could mandate this change, but I kind of heard that it was in the context of doing a citation. And really the change, I'm trying to figure out why. That was what I wrote down when I got the letter. Why? And I think I heard to clarify, but really it was just a way of, it says why there, but a way to get rid of gravel driveways. And as I'll repeat what I said earlier, the 2005 board didn't, just to clarify what you said, the attorney, that they were not prohibiting it in total or absolutely. They had these exceptions for existing driveways, and that's what we're getting rid of now. And they did it for the reasons I said earlier, and we found since that time, I think we found that they do have a good functional merit. And all right, and so you could mandate this change, but in addition to it kind of being absurd, going to this worse material, as I kind of just sketched, I found just from talking to contractors on this, just to find out more about this, and they said that to do it, that I have a side-by-side property, and my neighbor also has a gravel driveway, and he's not here today. He's in the hospital. I finally, after he had a stroke and went to AFib, so I didn't want to tell him, but he finally got stabilized, and his name is Kenneth Carpez, and he said, "Sure, yeah, I'm opposed to it. Tell him that." Okay, Kenneth. And he's been here 52 years too, and in that same one, and he's on a fixed income, and he can't do it. He said he figures it's effectively an eviction to a long-standing guy. But anyway, so he's not very happy with this, that's for sure. And so they said that, well, let's say that he doesn't want to do it, then I do it. You know, I want to be a conformist too, like everybody, and I do. I'm a good citizen, and but in order for them to I just learned that today, that for them the contractors to apply the asphalt, which I would have to be forced to get because that's the only thing I could afford, it has to go on my neighbor's property, and if he doesn't allow it, I wouldn't be able to get it done. So then you kind of have this, I don't know, I'd like to do it, but I can't. And so then what do? You start fining me or something? And that's like sort of a unexpected consequence of something you might not think, oh, it's just simply pave it. It's maybe a little more complicated than that. And the other thing I discovered is, and I talk a little bit with Ms. App about this, curiously, in this whole thing about driveways, I mean, they'd specify materials, specify the exceptions that we're trying to get rid of now, but they don't even define what a driveway is in the code. I confirmed that with Ms. App today. And the reason, I just assumed it was from the sidewalk to the yard, and I assumed that there's the yard, there's the driveway, and then there's the yard. And, because I never use my garage or anything, I just park in the driveway, so. But my neighbor, thinking about for him in his mind, his yard is gravel. Mine happens to be concrete in my backyard, and or my approach to the garage. So what is the scope of his work? I'm speaking on his, for him now. He's in the hospital, but would it? What's the definition of driveway? Remember, Voltaire said, if you wish to have a conversation or debate with me, please define your terms.
Would it be all the way up to the garage is what he's asking?
Yes, a driveway would be considered the paved surface that conveys a vehicle from the street to the garage.
To the garage? Yes. Even if, like, his is just used for just, stuff. He doesn't even use it. I think somebody in here possibly brought that up, too. the other thing, but it would still be required, the mandate would be for him to
Yes.
pave his yard then or something?
He would have to pave all the way up to his garage.
Garage, even if he's not using it as a,
Yes, because it is a garage, and the intention would be that obviously somebody who lived there may want to use said garage as an actual garage.
because like, that's the other thing, since we have side by sides, then we get a deal, he does his side, my side, but then now his side is enormously expanded. And so anyway, that was something that I just wanted to make that observation. Okay. I think, and this is very expensive, and while Ms. Apt has been very responsive to my questions, I just wanted a couple comments on this. I didn't see it in the landmark, but we got our correspondences to the property owner, and I wondered, it could have been more. I want maybe it's very significant amount of money, and maybe the less than best face was best for the Riverside community. Well, Ms. App has been responsive to my queries. The changes being proposed here was sent with the anonymous addressee property owner, so that some might have put this in the junk mail pile. Indeed, I did talk to a few people, and they said they didn't get it. Thanks for telling me about this. And they may have just said, oh, okay, it's one of those things. Just put it in the pile. And also, the changes weren't included. The changes are the guts of the thing. And we're not including the correspondence. You had to go over to the Village Hall to get them. And they close at 4:30, so, you kind of miss it a couple times and stuff. And we also put it in the busiest month of the year for everybody with families. So anyway, I don't know, it gets the impression that we're trying to just ramming it through for something that's going to be over 50% of my wealth. Everything is going to go into that driveway. Just an observation, and could have been done better, I think. Okay, I think that's about it. Thanks for listening to me.
Mr. Tomacek? Can you stay at the podium for a second, please?
I have a question. So one of the reasons that we're here is when we look at the existing code provisions, it's confusingly written, right? And so you're saying that the intent of the board in 2005 was to allow all the gravel driveways that existed to continue forever, so long as they met those maintenance standards, right?
It's right in there, actually.
No, I understand, but there's 3 different sections that talk about gravel driveways and the prohibitions, and they're hard to read together. They're hard to make work together. So then we started looking at historical village materials, and that's when we saw, for instance, this letter that went out in 2008, where it says, until November 21st, 2010, you can maintain them to those maintenance standards, but the intent was that after that date, everybody needs to comply, whether you're existing or not. But I've heard several people say they're sure that the 2005 board meant to allow these to continue forever, and I'm just wondering what that's based on. Was there correspondence at the time? Were you guys part of the discussions? Was anyone? And they even talk in this letter about holding an informational session at Village Hall on 2008 where they're answering questions about the gravel driveways having to come into compliance.
Yeah. The word grandfather was used during that time. My wife right away said, I thought we were grandfather. And several, Miss Sweeney said that too. I thought we were grandfathers. That was a word that was communicated to us, which usually means you're exempted from new standards because of existing.
Why would they put a date of 2010 on it if everyone could stay forever?
If I had to go and try to square that, it could be that it's for the, if you choose to do the transition, maybe.
At that meeting, there was one man from Public Works and a bunch of angry gravel driveway owners. And it looked like he didn't want to be there.
And just reading it recently, and I would add, does it state 2010 or does it state 5 years after this is dated, something like that? I got to it eventually, but the several times that we read it initially, you can read you can go through your code and read it and go to its reference and never read the part about the 2005 5 That was the problem that I had.
Which is why we're here.
Right, we're just trying to clarify, and so it's important for us to understand what you know about the original intent.
Yeah, I actually forget the exact years, but I do recall this issue came up, and there was a lot of concern among gravel driveway owners. And then when we got word that after.
Can you go to the
final
podium,
decision-
please, Mr. Plunkett?
Yeah.
Switch out.
I remember after a bit of a stir some years ago, we were all very relieved when we got word that current gravel driveways were going to be grandfathered in. And I agree, the term grandfather was right in the document that we received. And we're very relieved because we're off the hook, and it did require that we have pavers or something to separate the lawn from the gravel and that kind of thing. But just that. But
So you got a document that said you could keep your driveway?
you know, I looked for that actually. I wanted to bring it over here, and I guess I've pitched it. It was quite a number of years ago.
I mean, the document is the code itself,
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to strike. You guys are striking it, but it's specifically, it's set 10-7-3.8, paragraph 8. That's where it gives the maintenance criteria that you have to satisfy in order to keep the gravel driveways for already existing owners. Because the 10.10.7, I should say, sorry about that, stuttered, not good. 10.10.7, non-conforming residential driveways makes a reference to the exception. And when I showed it to my son, who was a computer programmer, he said, oh, that's just an exception, it's not a contradiction. I thought it was a contradiction, but why would the 2005 board write in a contradiction? They just, very typical standard thing in this kind of stuff is they made an exception, otherwise known as sort of like grandfather.
Right, but because it's confusing is why we started looking at the historical documents, and so much closer to the time than we are now is when the village was telling people, sending letters saying you need to come into compliance by November 2010, right? And so that.
But with the provision, they had that exception, otherwise we would have been up in arms. If we thought we had to do that, we saw that we had the escape clause, the grandfather clause, and otherwise we would have been attending to it. I mean, doing all this.
Okay, and not to belabor it, but the 2008 letter that I'm looking at says, during the grace period, gravel driveways must be maintained according to those standards that you reference, but that you have a grace period to bring non-conforming driveways into compliance by November 21st, 2010. Until then, you can maintain it according to those standards, but after November 21st, 2010, if you still have a gravel driveway, you're going to be fined by the village. And so, and then it talks about that meeting. So what do we remember about that meeting and what?
I remember nothing about a grace period, for example. So I don't know.
Okay.
But while I'm up here, could I ask just one quick question? With these, in redoing the driveways, if we go this route, are grading permits required? Do we need to hire a civil engineer to come in and do a topographical study? And
Driveways don't typically require a grading plan. I would say the caveat might be the code specifically reads that a grading plan will be required if the impervious surface is going to be increased by 10% or more than 10%. So I suppose there could be a case that an extremely large driveway may technically require a grading permit, but that's going to be the rarity, not the norm, I would think.
will we have to pay for a demo permit with the county and
No,
pay to
for a driveway, no,
haul
there's not
driveway?
The demo permit is for actual, like, buildings with the county, so there's no
We don't have to
demo.
haul the current gravel away before pouring new.
It'll be part of the part of the driveway permit, even with the new, going from like an asphalt to a concrete driveway, part of the permit includes the excavation of the existing driveway and then the installation of the new driveway.
What about floodplains, people that are in the floodplain area? I mean, I know I didn't sign in, I'm worried about that affecting what happens when we flood.
I think if it's going to be within its existing footprint, there's not going to be an issue with that, because technically a gravel driveway is not considered a permeable surface per MWRD standards or the village standards. So provided you're not increasing the size of the driveway, when you're just maintaining or replacing its existing portion, I don't necessarily know that anything's going to click in from a MWRD IDNR permit standpoint. There's potential, and I'm not the village engineer, but typically there are exceptions for work within existing footprints on existing structures in regard to work in the floodplain.
And so what would the costs be other than the cost of someone coming in and creating the driveway, what's the village cost to me to go get a driveway? Do I have to have an inspection, I just want to know.
Yeah, there is a permit process. So there is a building permit that would be required. Typically, there is a pre-pour inspection and a final inspection done by the building inspector to make sure appropriate base was put in and that everything was installed correctly. The permit fee for a driveway is 1.75% of the value of the job, with the minimum fee being $100.
I just hope that you guys hear the number of people that this is really gonna, two people have said that they'll leave the village. That, to me, you should consider these people.
Okay. Can we swear you in?
I'm just telling you, I
Yeah.
feel like you're all,
We listen to everybody.
I hope so.
Ms. Plunkett?
Well, she's going up to, you said 10%, the threshold for, is 10% of the
Increase,
of the next, your
10%.
Your property depth, length and width.
the area of the lot. Mhm.
The question I have for you is, I think you've stated, Ms. App, that the reason that you want to get rid of the gravel driveways is because of dust and because of maintenance, or lack of maintenance, perhaps.
I said the initial conversation that came up when this was originally discussed back in 2005 says the major issues that they wanted to address was dust and the maintenance issues related to gravel driveways. And so that's why changes were made to the code where they are specifically prohibited. So no new driveway could be built as gravel, which was not necessarily clear in the previous code. And then there was the language put in there about what to do with existing gravel driveways. I would continue to say that gravel driveway maintenance is an issue in the village, and there are many gravel driveways that have not been maintained. And so the issue is that staff, when doing enforcement, is saying that those gravel driveways need to be replaced with a non-gravel material. And that has caused some of the issues that we're coming up against now in related to clarifying what does the code say. But I would say that still continued maintenance of gravel driveways is, and if we continue to allow them, will continue to be an ongoing issue.
I understand that. I don't think, we have a gravel driveway that's 130 or more feet, and nobody peels out of it. I've never seen, being from country, you'd see, I have the impression of really a lot of dust, but I don't know why dust would be part of that, because you really don't have any. Again, compared to asphalt, which I find really bad, and I would hate to have to put in an asphalt driveway with, again, the petroleum products. I think we need to get a little greener. And I can't afford the other ones, sorry.
Are there like codes governing, we talked about the gravel detail here, the codes, they have a whole list in that little section that I referred to. Are there codes governing concrete or asphalt? Like the peeling paint standard,
Yes, there's building codes related to concrete and
So what's
asphalt
like,
driveways.
they
So
say
there are
it's cracked or
standards,
something?
yes, that they need to be maintained,
And what, and it maintain means what, no cracks? No.
limited cracks, yes. Mhm.
I mean, there's a real lot of, I mean, the brand new ones I see are nice, and I become a student of this.
It needs to be maintained so that the integrity of the driveway is being maintained.
So, in fact, I mentioned peeling paint, that's one of the things I thought of. The village has a standard for.
Mr. Tomaszek, can you go to the
Oh,
podium,
yeah,
please?
The peeling paint standard, I thought was kind of analogous. The village has a standard, if you have paint, you can't be peeling, and that means it has to be maintained. But it doesn't mandate you to not have paint. That is, doesn't mandate masonry or ironworks instead, or siding. It doesn't mandate. So I think that's somewhat analogous. You just you can have paint, but just make sure it's not peeling. Make sure it's okay. So you do it for paint. You should do it for driveways. I want to make that.
Anybody else? Note that when we close the public hearing, you will not be able to say anything while the commission deliberates. So if you have anything else that you would like to say, a final comment, a rebuttal, summary statement, now's the time to do it, because again, once we close the hearing, the public portion of the hearing, you will not be able to say anything. That's out of fairness to others in the audience who have left and will not have an opportunity to say anything. Ms. Lesher, please.
This is more personal than general. My neighbor and I did put in a request, and I think the commission passed it and said they would pass it along to the board. And I want to make sure that any change to text isn't retroactive to when we made our request for variance. So that's my request.
Thank you.
If I'm understanding this correctly, the big issue is dust and some people that don't maintain their driveways. So we all now have to do new driveways because somebody isn't maintaining theirs? That just seems kind of silly. And the dust issue maybe can be solved in some way. I think this is overkill, frankly.
Anyway, Ms. Apt, as I said, was very nice with my questions, and she gave me the list of people that the letter went out to, which is nice, 29. So I kind of had a little bit of a field trip and just told them, don't forget to attend, you know, and the meeting. But anyway, I also got a chance to see these things, and you know, in the scope. And I found, like, I think two that were okay. I get it. These were they had vegetation growing, and they had like ruts. Maybe two. Everybody else was, I thought, in compliance. It looked fine. Something it doesn't jut out like a sore thumb or anything. I saw a couple of them that were recently done, and evidently this guy here was here plus somebody else, and you know, with fresh gravel. And but anyway, I just wanted to say that they look like in very good repair. And so there's probably a saying that not a problem or something that it doesn't seem to be a big problem. That's all. I saw that it looked like reasonably good at repair. Everything was for my field thing of every 29 of them.
They did that work, you might as well share that knowledge. I don't think anybody else, well, maybe you guys did, but.
Okay. So 20 or so driveways have come into compliance, have used
Over the
permitted
past
materials?
10 years or so, yes. The original list was, I think, 43 properties.
Okay. Anyone else?
Can I ask, do you know if, or I can save this question for later if you'd like.
Yes, sir.
Sonia, do you know if those the driveways that came into compliance, were those typically at the sale of a house or just, or do you even know? I'm not-
Some of them I know were with the sale of the house because they were ones that I, made
Inspected.
notifications to with the compliance, and they came in within the year that we give them to get permits and replace the driveways. Other ones that kind of predate me, there were plenty that were replaced prior to me starting with the Village of Riverside, and I don't necessarily know that they were part of a compliance process or not, but they were replaced. Mhm.
Thank you.
Can I ask, so if in the next 3 years, sorry, this passes, we have to have it changed in the next 3 years,
and I decide that I have to sell my house within that time, then I have to let the new owners know, correct?
The village will as well.
The village will as well
It'll be, it
also.
would, we do the certificate of compliance that we do with every sale of a property. So on that certificate of compliance, we would make a note that there's been the code change and that you do have an existing gravel driveway and it would need to be brought into conformance by this date per the code. So that notation would be made on there as well, but obviously, the more time you give somebody to know, the better, so.
Yes. Okay, also, my yard floods terribly. My neighbors on each side don't. You could put ducks in my yard. So I brought in dirt, had dirt brought in already 3 times, and it just doesn't seem to make a difference. Usually when we lose power in the 100 block of East Quincy, the south side is just a small section. So even though we might lose it first, we're the smallest grid, so we're the last for ComEd to fix because bigger numbers look better, and ComEd has told us this. So they're always in my yard with the trucks, and that might be a reason too, because, that's where the pole is. And I was just gonna make a kind of a funny comment, I guess. It would be great if you could get some of the dust from the railroad. I can't even open my back windows, and that really is pretty bad. And I'm on the south side. I mean, my yard is not the tracks. It's, across the street and the homes that face me. So, but I want to say thank you for everything. I really appreciate it.
Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second?
Actually,
Quick, please. Real quick, please.
Just so we kind of in abstracting things out. So if somebody didn't do this or couldn't do it, what happens? Just we could lay it out chess or whatever. Somebody can't do it. Let's say the changes go in. There's no more exception, and they can't do this economically, whatever. Let's say they didn't sell, because I think we specified what happens if you sell. That path. I'm a computer programmer, so you got to know which way everything logic. If you sell it, then I think I heard that. Excuse me, forward. Sorry. Then it's done at sales time through some process, and if you don't sell, then what? But you don't get the stuff done. What happens?
Right, so that's a good question I had on my list. You were to answer.
So typical code enforcement, when something is not in compliance, we will send you a notice of violation letting you know that something needs to be repaired, and we will give you a certain time frame to take care of it. So depending on how the board wants us to do this, we're going to be sending notifications throughout that 3-year period. So if at the end of the 3-year period it's still not done, technically the next course of action would be to write citations for adjudication for violations of the zoning ordinance, and then it would go through the adjudication process. So there is the potential for fines, but again, ultimately the village board, or the village's goal, the village board's goal is compliance, not necessarily fines, but there is that process, and there is the potential for fines to be assessed.
And then so
through that
fines,
process.
and if the person still didn't do it, or whatever, the fines would accumulate, and, can the village impound or put a lien on the property or attach themselves, and that those
Fines would need to
become
be paid, and they could be liened on the property if they are not paid. But fines are assessed by the adjudicator. I don't just get to assess a fine every day. It goes through the process, through the tickets, and the adjudicator assigns the fine at the end of the process. We have the option to bring it before the adjudicator again. If it within, I think it's within 1 year, you can only write a citation twice. So I could write a citation again if within a year it still hadn't been taken care of. But at that point, then I would need to file action in the circuit court for the violation as a violation, and then it would go through that process.
And the action that you'd file in the circuit court would be attaching a lien to the property?
Essentially, yes. The ultimate outcome would be a
And then
lien.
at sale time, of course, then that would be paid.
That has to be paid.
So what would be paid back would be the fines, then, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plus, well, yeah, I guess, would they, at sales time, would it be the cost of bringing it up to code, or that's just the fines?
The fines would need to be paid, and typically what we have done is required that something be done within 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. Sure, like a promise by
for
this-
violations to be
Okay.
corrected. So we ask for a letter from the buyers stating that they will be taken care of.
Magnitude of fines, what are they?
$750 per occurrence per day.
Per day. That was my recollection, because that's what I mean. I do remember that letter, Mr. Mars, and that really got attention, but then they said that we were off the hook, so, because of the ordinances, right? So, the exception. So $700, it was $700 then, but a day, so, well, that could really add up. So I just wanted to put that out there, I think. Thanks for the clarification for the different branches of logic and stuff. Because there's a lot of people who say, well, I just won't do it. I've heard that a lot in my little field trips here. And they could be in for some major, if it's because of money, then you're gonna pay money later, but, all right, I think that's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So we have a motion to close the hearing. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Who made the motion?
Joel?
Joel, thank you.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we want to have a discussion first, or put a motion on the table? Discussion? Discussion. All right.
So first things first, I'd like to discuss whether this material is considered a green material, if it's considered a permeable material. It seems to be, we're getting a split opinion in the crowd of, is it considered a green and healthy material, and does it allow for better drainage? And the answer is no, it doesn't allow for better drainage. It's not considered a permeable material. Over time, I think, Jenny, you had said, some of the properties you've worked on, it's considered just as dense as concrete over years because the dust and the compaction of everything does not allow for drainage. So that's one conception that I want to make sure that we're all clear on here at least.
And sort of related to that, this is an unusual discussion because we don't have a lot of information, or really any information in front of us today about the benefits and drawbacks of gravel as a substrate. But because in the village's view, that was prohibited back in 2005, so we're not really even considering that. It's considering these amendments to the code to make it less confusing, which is what I think makes this such a mess today, because we have the village as an entity saying, well, we made this decision in 2005 and we're just trying to clean up the language. And we've got a room full of property owners who had a very different interpretation of what was done in 2005. So we've heard a lot about people being pro-gravel, but that's not really, I think, the heart of what we're being asked to do by the village board in this case.
Are we bound to only do what the village board asks us, though? Because there does seem to be a question as to why this is in the code to begin with, and is that something that we care to discuss?
Well, I guess within the context of what was published for the public hearing, this was for clarification. So we weren't proposing to change it to say gravel is a permitted driveway material. So if that's something that the commission wants to move forward with, that would have to be a separate hearing and a separate discussion from this discussion. So this is about existing gravel driveways and what is to be expected / done with existing gravel driveways.
That's not,
So,
I'm gonna argue and say that's not entirely what the public hearing statement, and I'm just reading it off the agenda, says to revise and/or clarify permitted driveway materials and regulations related to gravel driveways, and to revise and/or clarify conformance timelines relative to existing residential gravel driveways. I did listen or watch the discussion on the village board, and the village board, I think, was fairly clear in where they thought this was going, in that the attorney would draft the amendment and the amendment would address the ambiguities. And then there were some other questions about whether or not staff had seen any other variation requests, and another comment that the original petitioners at Berry Point didn't really have a zoning hardship as much as an economic hardship, and we've certainly heard a lot about economic hardships. And then it was tabled. And then village president also noted the timelines that had been noted by you, Sonia, the original 2005, and then the 5-year compliance, and then notices that were sent in 2008 and 2015. So that being said, we are looking at the regulations, and regulations is a pretty broad statement. And then revise and clarify. So revise and clarify can encompass an awful lot.
But the village board did not ask us to consider making gravel a permitted material.
Correct.
So if that's something that the majority of commissioners want to consider in the future, we can put that to the board for potential discussion, but that I don't think is a discussion for tonight because we don't have any materials for it.
I'd say the village board hasn't heard from the residents on this one, so they just don't have the background either. The entire discussion was related to the one variance request at Berry Point, and the confusion that evidently ensued over the reading of the ordinance, of the code, sorry.
So the notice, as you note, was intentionally written broadly because we didn't know how the discussion would go. And there are, as we've talked about, confusing, somewhat conflicting provisions. And I agree, it says part of it says revise permitted driveway materials and regulations related to gravel driveways. I mean, if you ultimately want to make a recommendation to allow gravel as a permitted driveway material, I think you could. But I also think the chairperson's point about that wasn't what the board intended when they sent it, but if that's how it ended up, that's how it ended up.
And I'm not arguing with either of those interpretations. I think we're in this conundrum because we have an assumption about compliance with a previously defined code, and then also there's an obligation to recognize what that code means when it's applied. And I think that is a fair discussion point, but if the village board doesn't want us to go there, then they can tell us not to go there. So I defer to the chairperson on whether or not we should, kind of where you want to go with this.
I think there is a way to look at this where we deal with existing gravel driveways and have maintenance standards just for existing gravel driveways and still maintain that no new driveways in gravel can be allowed.
If I have the option to throw out an idea.
If we want, so there's certainly a way that this could be written to allow that if that is what the commission wants to do.
My thought after listening to the community, and thank you, was that, and I think we discussed this last time around, is the maintenance issue is a requirement. We have maintenance standards for houses, we have landscaping standards, we do have certain minimum requirements that go with homeownership. So that gets us to the maintenance standards that are already described in the code. I think if we're adamant that gravel driveways should not be a part of the village other than at historic homes, then I think we do need to recognize that it could potentially be a significant financial outlay for a lot of people. And I would disagree with the comment somewhere in the summary here where there was an assessment of cost and that cost was not exorbitant. I think clearly cost could be exorbitant. It's very hard to judge that at this point. Where I'm going with this is I think I would go with a requirement that at the sale of the house, you gotta bring it up to standard.
The only problem with that, though, is people who share a driveway. Because then you can't do half the driveway.
You could do half the driveway. I think it makes things more complicated, and I recognize that. But I think we do have to be realistic about what people can afford, and this ends up being an unfunded mandate.
Is that an option that we could do, is say that the code won't be, I don't like saying this, that the code won't be enforced until the sale happens? Or is the way that?
Yeah, you could do that.
Okay.
It becomes legal non-conforming, doesn't it, to some extent?
Right, so instead of the draft text amendment says they're legal non-conforming because they're not historic or they're not an acceptable, one of the permitted materials.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of the January 31st, 2023 date, we could substitute that they have to come into compliance at the date they're sold.
Mm-hmm.
Or no
within-
sooner than
Right.
January 21st, 2023, you know?
Not to cut off discussion, but I would be strongly in favor of that, having it, compliance occur on the date of the sale, simply because that seems to be what our practice has been for the past decade or so. So it would be just memorializing that in code, which I like, and then that also gets back to the one standard for variations that concern me about this, the relative gain to the public as opposed to the hardship imposed on the applicants. I think it sort of balances the scales a bit that way, and that everyone knows what they're dealing with. A new homeowner would know exactly what the cost would be associated with that.
And the reason I suggest this is I think it's really the only way to balance this. if we want to get rid of gravel driveways, so be it. And that's certainly a legitimate, it can be a goal. And I think it just has to be done reasonably. I mean, and the sale of the house seems like an opportune time to do that.
And let's be clear, it's not for dust, it's a blight issue. Most are well-maintained, but there's a handful that you can look at and say, this is very much a blight. So,
Yeah, and if anyone was, Sean was Googling a couple street views of homes that had gravel driveways, and there are clearly a few that need a lot of help. Not all, but some.
right, absolutely.
But would still be enforcing the maintenance provisions that
Oh,
we have. We keep those-
Jennifer, yes.
So
that's
the ones that
required.
look bad won't look bad because they'll come into compliance with the maintenance provisions, right?
Attorney Mars?
Right, so that was gonna be my next suggestion. If you're going to allow this longer period, then we want to reinstate the maintenance standards. correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so based on what I was hearing, residential gravel, the 10-10-7 would say residential gravel driveways other than those authorized by subsection 1073E7A6 above must be replaced with a permitted driveway material listed in 1073E7A within 1 year of the sale of the property, but in no event earlier than January 31st, 2023.
Why no earlier?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think we need the date.
Well, if someone has their property for sale now, I mean, that would mean, okay, that's fine. When I brought that up, the 3 years, I thought that's what. you guys were
Attorney
looking to
Mars,
say.
sorry, two things. One, I'd say 6 months. Number two, you cannot pave or do asphalt in January or necessarily even December. The plants are closed.
Right.
So, May 15th. Realistically, if you're gonna put in a driveway, it's gonna have to be when it's above freezing.
So why shorten the period?
Well, that's understood.
I'm just trying to provide additional context for Attorney Mars's edits that January 31st is just, it's almost a pointless date. It needs to be realistic in terms of construction. That's all I'm trying to add there.
That was just 3 years from when the board would potentially be voting on this.
Oh, thank you. I did not tie the board vote and the future meeting date to.
So it was 3 years from board action.
Thank you,
on,
sorry. Even if the board even based on the board action, I think it still needs to be May 15th.
So within 1 year of the sale of the house?
I think 1 year.
So 1 year past the sale?
So is, based on your comment, do we still want to do, but no earlier than May 15th? Or do we just want to say within 1 year of the sale of the house?
I would say within 1 year. I wouldn't want to put in another date that I think might make the ordinance more confusing again.
Okay. Fair point.
I would support Jennifer.
And then keep 10738 for the maintenance language?
I think in that section, we need to make sure that it's revised to say that existing residential gravel driveways shall comply with the following maintenance standards.
So if the first paragraph, continue to remove, are allowed to continue provided that they comply. Say again what you wanted?
I think
Catching
to
up.
read that, other than decorative pea gravel driveways authorized by subsection 10.7, so-and-so above, existing residential gravel driveways shall comply with the following maintenance standards.
I think we still need to keep a statement in there that they're considered non-conforming in order to push people to the non-conforming section where it talks about bringing it into compliance.
I think that's fine, as long as we get rid of that language that says are allowed to continue, because I think that's what's problematic
Okay.
in there.
Existing non-conforming residential gravel driveways shall comply with the following maintenance standards.
I think that works.
Until such time as they're brought into conformance pursuant to
10.10.7.
10.10.7. And to Sonia's point, can we keep the language about them being non-conforming? Or I guess they would be conforming until that point, so long as they comply with those standards, right?
I think she
Well-
said, she
Well,
had
it's
said
not a-
existing non-conforming, right?
Okay.
It's not a permitted material, so existing non-conforming residential gravel driveways shall
Got it,
comply
got it,
with the
got it.
following
Okay.
until such time.
Then you bring back in bullet points A, B,
Yep.
C.
Mhm.
And I think it's bullet point D that's gonna be the toughest one, just because the steel edging typically isn't there on the historic homes. The gravel tends to just bleed out into the grass.
It's there for, Conley Estate has it.
Cooley Estate has it, yes, but many of the other houses, it tends to just be gravel that goes out into the grass, so.
Correct.
I would say bullet point D probably shouldn't apply to most people's houses.
Do you have any idea what most
There's not a
edges
lot,
are?
not many of them have steel edging.
No.
There's a few that maybe have kind of a paver edge, but for the most part, there's no,
It's rock right in the grass.
yes,
Well, it says or concrete or brick borders.
not many have that either.
No.
So do you recommend deleting D?
I mean, because that would be an additional expense for them to provide that
Correct.
containment feature.
Yeah, they
So
would
to
have
speak.
to, they would eventually have to spend money to do something that would be removed at the sale of house. And
Outside of
it's-
just providing the gravel to fill it to adequate size and compaction, so
Correct.
I can see taking that out.
I could go either way.
Commissioner Pelletier?
It doesn't seem like that big an expense, relatively speaking, to either put a metal edge or something to edge the driveway, so.
It's usually like a steel pile that tends to be maybe a 1/4 inch thick, and it's just digging it out, putting it down for the entire length. So it could be maybe not a great use of money. So
Maybe there
from
for
a
10
civil
years.
engineering point, what do you think?
Right?
Right, I mean, it's true.
I like the idea of the border, but I can understand Commissioner May's point about it being an additional expense that no one's expecting, and these things have a way of growing very quickly. Let it go, but very reluctantly.
And our goal is to get rid of them anyway.
Correct.
Well, and that's kind of, you're gonna be forced to install something that theoretically gets torn out when at the sale of the house.
Which could be 10 or 20 years.
Or it could be tomorrow.
Sure.
This
Absolutely.
is, infrastructure has a very long timeline or a very short timeline, as we all know.
The only reason I can think of that having been included in the first place was as an aesthetic consideration. But I suppose if we are enforcing that the gravel needs to be uniform from edge to edge. If there is something that's just spilling out into the lawn, there's other parts of the code that are already addressing that.
That is true.
And I do recognize that we're perhaps giving Sonia and her team a little bit more to look at in terms of inspections.
So my inspector is getting very familiar with the area, so, over this past year, so.
Can the gravel be contained without some edging?
Once it gets compacted enough, it doesn't spill out too much. I mean, maybe a little bit in the beginning, but I would say it's not a
This may be
huge
more
concern.
this may be more of an issue of contractor quality of work than anything else.
Fair point.
So consensus to strike D or maintain D?
I would strike D.
Strike it, let's move
All
forward.
right. Already did it. Other thoughts? Would you like to summarize the changes?
On 8, I was curious what you had, because I'm not sure we had the same thing.
Other than decorative pea gravel driveways authorized by subsection above, existing non-conforming residential gravel driveways shall comply with the following maintenance standards until such time, referencing 10.10.7. I think that's,
Until brought into conformance pursuant to 10.10.7. Okay.
is that close enough, Commissioner Hennigan, to what you were wanting?
That's just what I put, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as Chairperson Mateo just read, we would revise the language in regarding existing residential gravel driveways, to say other than decorative pea gravel driveways authorized by the section above, existing non-conforming residential gravel driveways are allowed to, wait, we weren't using.
Shall
it.
comply.
This isn't right,
Yeah.
because the pea gravel needs to be maintained as well. How about keeping what's there, shall be considered non-conforming residential driveways, period, and then starting with existing,
Well, a pea gravel driveway at a historic location is a conforming driveway.
Correct.
So existing non-conforming driveways need to X, Y, Z.
but
Right, so what if we broke it into 2 sentences? So other than decorative pea gravel driveways authorized by this subsection above, existing residential gravel driveways shall be considered non-conforming, period. Non-conforming existing residential gravel driveways shall be maintained according to the following maintenance standards until brought into conformance pursuant to 10.10.7. Something along those lines.
is the inference then that the pea gravel driveways also have to maintain these standards?
I would expect.
Oh, wait,
so.
that's why I was breaking it into 2 sentences. So we would say all gravel driveways should. Yeah, we have to say that all gravel driveways need to comply to these standards, but the non-conforming.
This shouldn't be this hard.
No.
All gravel driveways shall conform to the following standards. And then after that, we can say existing non-conforming residential gravel driveways must be brought into conformance in accordance with 10-10-7A, and then have that section outline when they need to change materials. So maybe we can have like an 8A and then an 8B, if that helps not have too many paragraphs or lists there or something.
Right, so 8A could be, all gravel driveways shall conform to the following maintenance standards, list the standards.
Mhm.
And then 8B could be, existing residential gravel driveways shall be considered non-conforming until brought into conformance pursuant to section 10-10-7.
Mhm.
Does that work?
I think so.
Jill?
We should probably do the exception for the pea gravel driveways in that part then. So 8 would just be existing residential gravel driveways, and then A would be all gravel driveways need to be maintained to these standards, and then B would be existing gravel driveways other than historic
Decorative
ones
pea
shall be
gravel.
considered non-conforming and until such time they are brought in
It
conformance.
must be, well, if we're not going to the maintenance standards, then it must be brought into conformance pursuant to section 10-10-7.
Pursuant to 10-7. Okay.
And I would propose we bring back D for the decorative pea gravel driveways.
Yes.
But make it clear that for decorative pea gravel only.
Yeah.
So we could say decorative pea gravel driveways.
That's right.
Shall be contained,
Thank you for.
because they probably already are. Hopefully.
Okay.
Do we need to hear the changes again before motions? Motion?
I don't think so.
No? Okay. Who would like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to incorporate the changes to the driveway standards as we've just discussed.
To recommend.
Yes,
Second?
I'm sorry, yes.
Second.
I recognize that we are recommending by.
In 10, just real quick, 10-10-7, we're just saying 1 year, within 1 year of the sale of the property, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Let's go through the standards, which are on page 2. The extent to which the proposed amendment promotes the public health, safety, comfort, convenience, and general welfare to the village by adding consistency to our driveways, but giving current owners more time. Relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship imposed upon the applicant.
Absolutely.
The consistency of the proposed amendment with village plans. Consistency would be the word there. The consistency of the proposed amendment with the intent and general regulations of the zoning ordinance.
Yes.
I think the clarity definitely improves the ordinance. Whether the proposed amendment corrects an error or omission, adds clarification to existing requirements, or reflects a change in policy. Adds clarification.
Yes.
That the proposed amendment will benefit the residents of the village as a whole, and not just the applicant, property owners, neighbors of any property under consideration, or other special interest groups, and the extent to which the proposed use would be in the public interest and would not only serve the interest of the applicant.
I think this in particular serves those 14 property owners who already brought their gravel driveways into compliance.
It applies village-wide. whether the proposed amendment provides a more workable way to achieve the intent and purposes of the zoning ordinance and village plans.
Yes.
Clarification, the extent to which the proposed amendment creates nonconformities. They're already nonconforming.
Correct.
The extent to which the proposed amendment is consistent with the overall structure and organization of the zoning ordinance.
It is.
Again, I would argue it improves it. Okay. We're ready to vote? Do we need more discussion?
That's fine.
Please call the roll.
Commissioner Marhol?
Aye.
Commissioner Pelletier?
Aye.
Commissioner May?
Aye.
Commissioner Hennigan?
Aye.
Chairperson Mateo?
Yes.
Motion passes.
So this is a recommendation that we make to the village board. It will probably go to their, what did we say, January?
I think it's January 16th.
16th meeting, where they make the final decision. And of course, you're more than welcome to come to that meeting and make your case again to them. So thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
And if you want to, feel free to reach out to me, call me, or email me. Once we have these changes made so they're ready to present to the village board, I'm happy to send you a copy of those for your reference, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. So we don't have any old business, new business, discussion and recommendations to staff on the potential use of planned unit developments?
We will be working on that and trying to get perhaps a draft code for you guys to look at and consider, and then maybe make some recommendations to the village board regarding that.
Folks, we still have our meeting, so you're welcome to leave, that's fine, but you need to be quiet, please. Thank you. Never used the gavel before.
I hopefully we'll have something for you guys to look at the January meeting. Additionally, we may have the Ames School Edition on the January meeting for public hearing, but it's still under review, so I'm not for certain whether that'll be ready for review in January or if it'll be ready in February.
Okay.
So that's kind of what we have looking forward. And we're back to our fourth Wednesday schedule until November next year, so.
That's January 22nd.
Yes.
Does having the child at Ames prevent us from voting on it?
No.
No.
Okay. Just making sure.
Otherwise, you'd lose a couple members of your council here.
Yeah, quorum might be hard.
I think that's all I have.
Well, I want to thank the commissioners and Director Apt and Attorney Mars and Trustee Pollock and Riverside TV for all your hard work and service this year, and look forward to January 22nd and hope everybody has a healthy new year.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everybody.
You too. Happy holidays.
Motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everyone.